Hey, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open our source material to explore a timeline that, well, it completely flips our understanding of modern history on its head. We're going to map out this wild alternate reality, basically looking at how the dominoes of cause, effect, and logistics might have fallen if just one absolutely crucial historical pivot had gone a little differently.
So get this, what if the American capital was established in London, right? It's a massive hook. It completely challenges how we think the modern world came to be. Instead of Washington, D.C. and this bloody, violent war for independence, imagine a reality where the American colonies literally never broke away from the British crown. We're talking about a unified transatlantic superpower existing right from the very beginning. That would completely alter the geopolitical balance of the entire planet.
Okay, let's dive into this step by step. We'll start with the London Compromise, look at the physical reality of a transatlantic capital, see how distance forced us into fast-tracking the future, explore the American eclipse, and finally, map out the global hyperstate.
Section 1. The London Compromise, a peaceful solution.
When we think of the 1770s, we're usually taught that a violent revolution was just, completely inevitable. But our source material highlights something super interesting. A peaceful political compromise was actually sitting right there on the table. The real catalyst for our alternate timeline kicks off in 1774 with something called the Galloway Plan of Union. This was a real historical proposal championed by a Pennsylvania conservative named Joseph Galloway. Basically, it called for a combined Anglo-American Grand Council. It was a system designed to give the American colonies full representation while keeping them firmly inside the empire. Now, in our actual reality, this failed by a really narrow margin in the First Continental Congress. But in this timeline, the intense political pressure actually works. The plan succeeds. Parliament radically restructures itself to give these rapidly growing colonies a real, binding voice in their own taxation and governance. To keep the peace and, let's be honest, to harness the explosive economic weight of the North American continent, Britain caves. London is officially declared the dual capital of a newly unified transoceanic empire.
Section 2. A transatlantic capital, building a new core.
So, now that this huge compromise is struck, the physical heart of the British Empire has to undergo a dramatic transformation to actually manage it. Now, what's really interesting about this is, well, just imagine walking down the River Thames in this timeline. You wouldn't just see the historic traditional Gothic architecture of the Houses of Parliament. No, right next to those ancient stone buildings, you'd see these massive, sprawling new administrative complexes built in that really crisp neoclassical American style. It's this crazy, literal, physical blending of the old world and the new world. Think about it. Thousands of newly arriving politicians, clerks, and diplomats from across the Atlantic would need housing, offices, infrastructure. It would completely remake the skyline of Westminster into this dual-continent command center.
Seriously, just imagine the incredibly complex scene inside these new administrative buildings. We're talking about a true transatlantic Congress. Picture it. Delegates from Virginia, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania working shoulder to shoulder with members of Parliament from Yorkshire, Scotland, and Ireland. The debates in these chambers would be absolutely legendary. You'd have a wealthy Boston merchant intensely negotiating global tea and shipping tariffs with some aristocrat from the Scottish Highlands. Or, Virginia planters debating agricultural subsidies with Irish representatives. It's a single, sprawling imperial core tasked with what's honestly an unprecedented challenge, governing two completely distinct continents with totally different local economies as one single cohesive geopolitical unit.
Section 3. Fast-tracking the future. Logistics of distance.
But here is where this unified state runs headfirst into its absolute biggest antagonist. And it's not a rival nation like France or Spain, right? It's the 3,000 miles of open ocean sitting right between them. 6 weeks. That is the agonizing logistical nightmare of distance in the early 19th century. Under standard sail power, if this transatlantic Congress passes an urgent piece of legislation in London, say, a military response or a sudden trade embargo, it takes up to 6 weeks just to reach the desk of a governor in New York. You literally cannot govern a rapidly industrializing, modernizing empire with this 6-week communication lag. If you tried, the entire administration would paralyze and eventually just fracture entirely.
So this massive logistical crisis essentially forces some incredible technological leaps. To keep the whole empire from falling apart, the state places an absolute unprecedented premium on engineering and communication. The timeline of human innovation drastically accelerates. We're talking way faster than in our timeline. By the 1820s, highly lucrative government contracts, specifically designed to ferry politicians and military orders across the Atlantic, pushed the steam revolution decades ahead of schedule. This gives us high-velocity, iron-hulled ships far earlier than in reality. And the transatlantic telegraph cable? Historically, that monumental engineering feat failed multiple times. It wasn't truly reliable until 1866. But in this timeline, instantaneous communication is a matter of absolute imperial survival. So it becomes this heavily funded, top-priority military project, successfully wiring London directly to New York and Boston by the 1830s. Innovation is literally fast-tracked out of pure geopolitical necessity.
Section 4. The American Eclipse, a Power Shift. As the 19th century rolls on, we see a massive shift in the balance of power. And what's wild is that it happens entirely without firing a single shot. A demographic inevitability just kind of takes over. The agricultural expanse, the resource wealth, and the industrial output of the American territories simply explode, and they completely outgrow the motherland. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole dynamic. Because the Congress is based on representation, the vast majority of the legislative seats are eventually held by the American wing. They entirely dwarf the British and European wing in sheer voting power.
This creates a super fascinating shift in the everyday culture and political reality of the empire. London definitely remains the ceremonial and political capital, serving as the historic anchor. But the raw financial and military power driving this whole empire, it's now fundamentally American. The British monarchy essentially becomes an institution that is funded, sustained, and protected by American industry and North American taxpayers. In this reality, the United Kingdom is effectively reduced to a highly prestigious European outpost for a superpower whose true economic heartland, population center, and industrial might lie 3,000 miles across the sea. It's a total flip.
Section 5. The Global Hyperstate, Modern Geopolitics.
Now, zooming out to the macro level, decades of this unified buildup shape a completely different modern geopolitical landscape. Geopolitically, there are no separated U.S. and British empires anymore. Instead, we have a single, unified Anglo-American hyperstate pretty much dictating global trade. But perhaps the most profound divergence happens around human rights. Instead of slavery ending via a horrific, bloody American Civil War in 1865, this timeline points to a completely different resolution. The British Empire actually passed the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833. So in this timeline, the combined voting weight of the British, Canadian, and Northern American representatives in the Imperial Parliament overwhelmingly outnumbers the Southern planter class. Slavery is abolished empire-wide by legislative mandate in the 1830s. The Southern states, completely lacking an independent national structure to rebel against, are essentially forced to accept the imperial decree, averting a civil war entirely. Plus, looking at European dynamics, there is no 19th century U.S. isolationism. American resources are directly leveraged in European conflicts right from the start. And culturally, London remains the undisputed, unassailable center of the English-speaking world.
So how does this thought experiment connect directly to us today? Just think about the year 2026 under this system. Our world would be completely unrecognizable. There is no independent American president sitting in an Oval Office. The leader of the free world is a single prime minister operating out of Downing Street. And critically, they're elected by a massive, diverse, global constituency spanning from the Pacific coast of North America all the way across the British Isles and outward through the entire Commonwealth.
So the crucial point here is that under this model, the concept of the West as an alliance of separate cooperating nations, like NATO for example, simply doesn't exist. In its place is a single, integrated, ocean-spanning empire anchored in London. It's a hyperstate possessing absolute singular dominance over global economics, military strength, and technological standards. Our source material leads us to this really fascinating philosophical realization. The ultimate way to conquer a revolution was simply to invite the revolutionaries into the halls of power. By offering a seat at the table back in 1774, the British crown might have lost its long-term demographic supremacy, sure, but it successfully absorbed its greatest threat and birthed an absolutely unstoppable global titan in the process. I want to leave you with a provocative thought today. If a single political compromise in 1774 could entirely reshape the global order, what seemingly minor political compromises are happening today that will secretly fast-track our own future? Keep that in the back of your mind as you watch the news this week. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.